Mass hysteria is not madness in the way we usually think about it. It doesn't always involve screaming throngs of people all hunting for some invisible assailant, though that certainly does happen sometimes. At its core, mass hysteria is just what happens when fear, belief, or emotional stress spreads through a group so powerfully that it begins to override individual judgment. And history is full of examples.
Crowds mobbed temples all over India to see Ganesh, the elephant god credited with bringing prosperity, drinking milk. As people throughout the nation declared it a miracle, others cashed in, charging 5 times the normal price for milk.
On the morning of September 21st, 1995, reports began emerging from New Delhi that statues of the Hindu deity Ganesha were drinking milk. Devotees claimed that when a spoonful of milk was placed against the trunk of the idol, the liquid would disappear. The claim spread rapidly. Within hours, temples across India were filled with worshippers carrying cups and containers of milk. Long lines formed outside shrines in Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, and Kolkata. In many locations, police had to be deployed in order to help manage the throngs of devout worshippers.
और दूध होगा आपके पास? मैं दूध तो जरूर होगा भगवान की कृपा से, तो थोड़ा सा कटोरी में दूध डाला, एक चम्मच ली, मंदिर के पट खोलने के बाद भगवान गणपति के दरबार में हम पहुंच गए। जा कर के हमने कौली में ये ऐसे हमारे पास कटोरी में हमने थोड़ा जो दूध था वो दूध डाला और चम्मच से दूध लिया, मान कि कहाँ पी रहे हैं, तो वहाँ हम पहुँच गए। तो वो इस प्रकार से जैसे ही लगाया हमने, तो भगवान गणपति ऐसे चूस रहे जैसे।
It's difficult to argue with the footage. Whenever a person touched a spoonful of liquid to the statue, it would start to recede and eventually disappear.
ऐसे करके हम जो है नलकी से फ्रूटी वगैरह पीते हैं, ठीक उसी प्रकार से दूध अंदर, चम्मच हमने हल्का सा ऐसे किया और दूध अंदर गया।
It was as if the deity were accepting the sacrifice in real time, and unlike so-called miracles involving statues, everyone seemed to see the same thing. By midday, reports extended beyond India. Hindu communities in London gathered at temples in Wembley and Southall. The same process was repeated in Toronto, New York, and San Francisco. Milk sales rose sharply in many of these places as Hindus either rushed to replicate the miracle or interpreted Ganesha's intervention as a sign to drink large quantities of milk, but not everyone was convinced.
Indian government scientists declared that milk was simply being absorbed by the texture of the statues, but devout Hindus weren't put off.
It's a miracle. I think it's to do with the state the world's in at the moment. And I think that for some reason the gods are hungry and the people are suffering.
I couldn't believe it. I thought I'm going to see it for myself, and I just saw it for myself. It's absolutely amazing.
As Hindus flocked to their temples with milk to slake the thirst of their gods, the Indian Rationalist Association dismissed the phenomenon as mass hysteria. It offered scientific explanations, but they were ignored by the World Hindu Council. It declared that a miracle had indeed occurred.
Scientists attempted to explain away the miracle via a process known as capillary action, the same phenomenon that allows water to travel up plant stems. It causes small quantities of liquid to adhere to a surface that is actually more porous than the human eye can detect. When milk was poured slowly against a vertical surface, it could appear to vanish, as it spread thinly across the stone and dripped to the base. Subsequent observations confirmed that the milk was not disappearing entirely. In many temples, puddles accumulated around the statue's feet. By September 22nd, the phenomenon had largely subsided, but there are still tens of thousands of Hindus who will gladly claim they were part of the milk miracle. One of the strangest facts about this particular event is that it died away so quickly. Even though milk drinking can still be replicated today, the social momentum seems to have dried up entirely.
The Emirates plane had 521 passengers on board during the 14-hour flight from Dubai to New York. The US Center for Disease Control says as many as 100 people reported feeling sick.
The term quarantine is far less shocking to people nowadays, but before COVID-19, the idea that people could bring contagious diseases with them when traveling was relatively new. So when people began feeling ill on board the Emirates flight from Dubai to New York City, panic set in almost immediately.
Very, very deep, intense cough, violently sick, going into the bathroom a lot. It was just so obvious. It was really bad when we were lining up to get on the plane and people were so intensely sick and nobody was checking or asking any questions.
This all took place on September 5th, 2018. While in the air, crew members were notified that several travelers were experiencing coughing and fever-like symptoms. As the plane approached John F. Kennedy International Airport, the pilot contacted authorities. Terrified that those on board could be carrying a potentially novel virus, the aircraft was swiftly directed to a remote area of the tarmac. It remained there for several very tense hours while emergency vehicles surrounded it.
Now to that emergency at JFK Airport here in New York City. Dozens of people on an incoming flight quarantined, the CDC right there waiting, all because of a mystery illness on board. The double-decker jet placed in that quarantine while health officials in masks and gloves screened everyone on board.
From inside the cabin, passengers recorded video of responders standing beneath the aircraft's wings. Adding to the hysteria surrounding the event was the fact that many people on board began posting on social media about how scared they were. Some of these individuals, including celebrity TV star Vanilla Ice, had sizable audiences, causing millions across America to fear that they were witnessing the birth of a pandemic.
3 passengers and 7 crew members sent to the hospital with flu-like symptoms. Medical personnel then taking each passenger's temperature before letting them go on to customs.
Were you concerned at that point?
No, I mean, it was rather scary to look at them. They're all in masks. When we got off the plane, there were, of course, ambulances.
Speculation about contagious disease circulated rapidly, and certainly wasn't helped by the dozens of television networks airing footage of the plane, masked CDC workers, and rows of biohazard-equipped ambulances. The experts didn't calm the waters much either. So, for several hours, Americans held their breath, sometimes literally, wondering whether or not they would soon be suffering through something akin to the Spanish flu epidemic. Then, it all just stopped.
I guess other passengers on the flight are less fortunate, but I feel great.
Did you notice on board the flight that some people were falling ill?
I did not, but it was an Airbus 380. It's a double-decker and a very, very large plane. Certainly nobody in the area where I was sitting seemed to be affected in any way. We were all as surprised as anyone when we were told that we couldn't get off the plane, that some passengers had fallen ill.
Subsequent reports indicated that several passengers tested positive for influenza, or other common respiratory infections. There was zero evidence of a highly contagious or novel pathogen. The quarantine was lifted within hours. The aircraft eventually proceeded to a gate, but you can't put the genie back in the bottle that easily. Conspiracy theorists claim that the entire operation had been a September 11th style bio-attack, one that the United States fell for hook, line, and sinker. Though the panic may have died down publicly, the event is still discussed in some less mainstream circles. What you're witnessing is a phenomenon that remains heavily debated to this day. Starting in early 2025, pupils at Shipopo Boarding Secondary School in Kapiri-Maposhi, Zambia began experiencing strange, unexplainable behavior. The unusual symptoms, including panic, abnormal behavior, and physical manifestations, led to hospitalization, not to mention a lot of concern among parents, authorities, and the internet. The incidents affected multiple students and appeared to spread rapidly through the school community.
Ministry of Health have so far issued a statement confirming a condition of movement disorder at the school. Health authorities in the district took samples which were sent to Lusaka more than a week ago, and they are still waiting for the results.
As the number of affected students increased, school authorities had no choice but to suspend classes. Next, local health officials were brought in to determine whether an infectious disease or environmental toxin was responsible.
I was shivering as though it was cold. I didn't know the real cause. I used to go on campus, I just used to shake, like my whole body used to shake. Then that stopped. Then on Friday in the evening, it started again, started feeling some irritation in my bones.
Strangely, medical examinations were unable to reveal any common pathogen. Environmental assessments, meanwhile, found zero evidence of chemical exposure. Nonetheless, videos of girls moving in strange ways continue to cause panic online. As this occurred in a post-COVID world, online commentators began to believe they were witnessing a potential pandemic, with some referring to it as the zombie virus, because of the pupils' seeming inability to control their movements. Then came a surprising diagnosis. A psychogenic illness is a phenomenon in which symptoms spread among members of a cohesive group without an identifiable organic cause. Strange as this may sound, episodes like these have been recorded for centuries in schools, factories, and other close-knit environments all around the world. Eventually, the case was dismissed as an example of how psychological stress can manifest physically and propagate socially. The school reopened, and much of the interest disappeared. But there are questions about whether or not the phenomenon did. In fact, some online conspiracy theorists believe that the strange movements and tics have increased, and the only thing preventing the world from knowing about them is local officials' efforts to keep footage from leaking. If you think something like this could only happen in a developing country, think again.
Anderson Cooper 360, CNN, weeknights at 8 and 10 Eastern.
It's very heartbreaking to me, to be honest. I am knowing that right now I can't do what I love.
Thera Sanchez was a cheerleader, an honor roll student, and as a senior at Leroy Junior High School in upstate New York, well on her way to planning her college future. When she woke up from her nap last October, everything changed.
I couldn't stop stuttering.
In late 2001, several students at Leroy Junior Senior High School in Genesee County, New York, began exhibiting sudden onset tics. They would stutter and continuously suffer from strange, jerky movements or outbursts. Like in Zambia, those affected were primarily teenage girls.
The stuttering took over, really contorting on the left side of, with her mouth and her neck.
Doctors told Thera her condition was brought on by stress and she would get better. But once the stuttering ended, it soon gave way to uncontrollable twitching.
And this goes on all day long, Thera?
Yes. Yeah.
All day long?
All day long.
This video was taken in the hospital in mid-October by Thera's mother, soon after she brought her daughter in for twitching. It was on that day, she says, a nurse told her Thera wasn't the only one who had been brought to the hospital with the condition.
As additional cases were reported, media attention intensified. News outlets from across the country traveled to the small town, and interviews with students and parents began airing on national television. The result, pretty much across the board, was panic.
She had said, not to alarm you, but somebody needs to contact somebody because you're the fourth girl in a week that come in with this.
In all, health officials say 12 girls from Leroy Junior Senior High School have exhibited similar symptoms. The girls were from different grades, and some didn't know each other, but many did, including Thera's friend, Lydia Parker.
Last time I went to the neurologist, they said that they're not sure and that they'll keep looking into it. But besides that, they haven't told anyone anything.
Families sought medical explanations. Some pursued independent testing. Given that all those affected were students at Leroy, the primary theory was that there was some sort of environmental contamination at work. Once again, the only diagnosis offered was that of mass psychogenic illness. The experts said that while the condition was capable of mimicking neurological disorders, it was actually triggered and spread through psychological and social dynamics. Parents were buying it. They believed that the real blame lay in a nearby toxic waste cleanup site, the result of a train derailment involving chemicals like cyanide that occurred near the town in 1970.
I used to go to 2 art classes every day. Now I'm not in school.
This is home video of Thera from October when she says the symptoms first appeared, barely able to speak.
What's he doing?
I was always so I was always so active, and everybody was always happy to be around me, but I don't feel like myself anymore.
Even more strange was the fact that, as the intense media coverage continued, the number of reported cases appeared to grow. Some of the girls began to worry that they would end up stuck like this forever.
And you've been admitted to art school. You're not in school right now. You want to go on to college. I mean, this is incredibly frustrating for you. Katie, how do you explain how 12 girls in your small town, all at the same high school, would have similar symptoms?
I can't explain it. They told us it was traumatic, but I really don't think any of us had that traumatic of a life before, and that it would randomly happen.
The most bizarre thing of all, most of the students' symptoms began to disappear as soon as the media coverage did. In March of 1985, a group of nearly 50 parents arrived at the McMartin preschool in Manhattan Beach, California. Using shovels, pickaxes, and, in some cases, their bare hands, they started digging. A few days later, an archaeological firm hired by the district attorney's office began its own dig, excavating hundreds of square feet of earth both inside and around the facility. What were they looking for? Secret tunnels, underground rooms, satanic altars. According to a local mother named Judy Johnson, the McMartin family, up to and including the elderly matriarch, was guilty of molesting, exploiting, and terrorizing dozens of innocent children. Over several years, the case would capture the attention of the people across the United States. In Manhattan Beach, however, it was pure hysteria. Child psychologists and social workers interviewed children who spoke of flying in the air, satanic rituals, children being chopped up and flushed down toilets. Parents, meanwhile, accused the McMartins and their friends, and even their spouses, until nobody trusted anyone anymore.
I have a daughter who has massive evidence of being raped and being socked.
They were tied up, socked. They were taken off the premises. They were threatened by watching animals being slaughtered. They were sold for prostitution. There was oral sex.
What did they use to intimidate the children?
Rabbits were cut, the feet were cut off one by one and flushed down the toilet. Turtles, the same type of thing. Their shells were broken off. Things on that order. If they talked, that's what was going to happen to their mom and dad, possibly their grandparents, their brothers and sisters. The children actually were doing out of love for us, because it was the ultimate love. They felt if they went along with what happened to them at the nursery school, that nothing was going to happen to us.
It was a prestigious school in the area. It had a waiting list. And
Kevin Cody, publisher of a local newspaper.
Virginia McMartin was the Manhattan Beach Woman of the Year 2 or 3 years prior to the investigations.
Witnessed the wave of sex abuse charges that washed over the entire beach community.
Do you know, altogether, including McMartin, how many schools in this area closed because of allegations of child abuse?
7.
And was anyone ever convicted?
No.
It only takes one match to light an entire forest on fire. Such was the case with McMartin Preschool. Before the mass digs, the death threats, and incidents of parents accusing one another of terrible deeds, there was one very unwell woman.
It was just last Thursday that Raymond Bucky and his mother, Peggy McMartin Bucky, were acquitted of 52 charges of child molestation in the notorious McMartin Preschool case from Southern California.
Tonight you're going to meet Peggy Ann Bucky, who was also accused in the McMartin case. The charges were finally dropped, but Peggy Ann is still trying to rebuild her life.
There is no evidence, and they will never have evidence because it never happened. Nothing ever happened at that school.
Judy Johnson was the mother of a 2-year-old boy. She was also a severe alcoholic with a long history of mental illness. Unfortunately, nobody in Manhattan Beach knew this. So when she began making claims about sexual abuse, people, including parents, authority figures, and child psychologists, listened. They also began asking their children about what, if anything, might have happened to them. But there was a problem.
Bruck had this pediatrician add some extra steps to his routine physical examination of preschool kids. He measures the child's wrists with a ribbon. He puts a little label on the child's stomach, and he tickles the child's foot with a stick. Never does the doctor go anywhere near the child's private parts. Then, right after the exam, using an anatomically correct doll, Bruck asks leading questions about the doctor's exam.
Can you show me on the doll how Dr. Emmett touched your vagina?
No, he didn't.
He didn't?
The child tells the truth. But just a few days later, Dr. Bruck and the child's father again ask about the doctor's visit. It's a different story. Before Bruck has a chance to even bring out the doll, the child shows how the doctor had strangled her with the ribbon.
He did this.
He put that around your neck?
Tight.
Like that?
He did tight. So tight.
Of course, none of it is true. Dr. Bruck found that when dolls were used, half the kids who'd never had their private parts touched claimed the doctor had touched them.
Judy Johnson may have been the origin of the molestation scandal. Still, the actual cause of the mass hysteria that infected the parents of Manhattan Beach was the child psychology techniques of the day. Children are not only fanciful but highly susceptible to suggestion. The right amount of repetition, combined with the wrong interview techniques, can produce completely untrue memories.
Now, there's no question about it. Some children will always tell the truth, and child abuse is a reality. But what researchers are proving is that some kids can be influenced to make up and then actually believe stories that never really happened. And tonight you'll see this with your own eyes. As John Stossel reports, the findings could change the outcome of sexual abuse cases which rest on a child's testimony.
Abuse. But then Cornell University professor Stephen Ceci read the testimony of some well-known molestation cases and concluded that interviewers had led the kids on by asking suggestive questions. The interviewers could say, how else can we get this information out? Because the kids won't volunteer it.
The problem is that from a research standpoint, we are now discovering that if you put kids who were not abused through the same kind of highly leading, repetitive interview, some of those children will also disclose events that seem credible, but in fact are not born in actuality.
Parents in Manhattan Beach were badgering their children about potential molestation. This often involved asking them leading questions, which eventually produced the results the kids thought their parents wanted to hear. Devastated by the thought that their kids had been abused, the parents' ability to think critically broke down. As such, they began disregarding information that could not be true.
There's roughly 5 hours worth of tapes on my children.
Watching the replay of those tapes must have been
Hell. Pure hell.
Afterwards, could you talk to the children about it? How did you handle that?
The children still are denying it. They were threatened so severely to keep quiet that they are still denying it. They are talking to a counselor, but they are denying it in front of my husband and I.
The previous footage is a perfect example. The children are encouraged to say one thing in therapy, then deny it when pressed later. The parents, meanwhile, allow themselves to be convinced that the denial is the lie, rather than the scenario produced by the therapy.
Do you know that sometimes secrets are hard to keep inside? And Mr. Alligator might say, maybe.
These puppets, used at the Children's Institute, a child abuse center, gently help coax stories from the frightened youngsters.
The children use them and we use them to let the puppets talk for the children. It gives children some distance from what they're talking about. It makes scary things less scary.
Over months of questioning, allegations multiplied. Some children described acts that investigators considered plausible within the framework of abuse, while others were far more bizarre. One of the most vocal of the children was Judy Johnson's son, who described underground tunnels, animal sacrifices, and ritual ceremonies involving goats, elephants, and flying demons. Nevertheless, the district attorney, the prosecutor's office, and dozens of parents all became convinced of the McMartin family's guilt.
Count 9, count 12.
After 124 witnesses,
Count 14.
1,000 pieces of evidence,
Count 56. Count 57.
and $15 million of taxpayers' money.
59.
The longest and most expensive criminal trial in U.S. history came to an end.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the very defendants not guilty.
Judy Johnson passed away from complications due to chronic alcoholism before the McMartin trial ended. To this day, some of the children report having memories of abuse.
I remember playing the naked lady game.
That was at a farm. That was part of the scare tactics. You know, this could happen to your mom and dad if you tell about anything that's happened.
And who killed the horse?
Ray Bucky.
Many parents feel the same.
I find it very sad. Very sad that the judge in this hearing wasn't willing to listen to the children, that he'd clearly had his mind made up before we ever walked in the room.
It's unlikely this mother will ever accept Peggy Ann Bucky's innocence as fact, and she is not alone. Manhattan Beach will remain a place where some people believe the Buckys are monsters, criminals who violated children, who led them through satanic rituals, used them as objects of pornography. These are the stories that were told, stories that Peggy Ann will have to live with, no matter how normal she tries to be.
A long time ago, at the beginning of this, I used to worry about what people thought. It really bothered me that people could think that I had done something so revolting to me. And then there came a point that I just said, I don't care anymore. I do not care if you think I'm innocent. I don't care if the guy sitting next to you thinks I'm innocent, because I would go crazy if I worried about it.
Even many media sources remain convinced that the widespread sexual abuse of children, often in the name of Satan, is a real problem.
Parents must talk. Once these parents started talking and comparing notes, a pattern was established, and then it became much clearer. So often, we live so isolated.
Well, I was staggered by a couple of things. First of all, the doctors didn't pick it up, but then they wouldn't be looking for that. And the other thing is, if we're so concerned about parents' groups and parents' activities and exchanges and so forth for older children, it would seem just good common sense to have it at this level. It's a shame it's taken this to have us sort of recognize that. Well, this obviously isn't the end of it. We have a series, and in a moment we're going to be joined by psychiatrist Dr. William Rader, who's going to give us a profile of a child molester, and most important, tell us how we can protect our children.
No extensive tunnel system was ever found beneath the school. No physical evidence of molestation or wrongdoing by any of the McMartins ever surfaced, nor have any of the family members been in trouble since. Fortunately, the case did prompt significant reforms in child interviewing practices and contributed to a broader reassessment of investigative methods in alleged abuse cases. The story of McMartin Preschool remains one of the most studied examples of how institutional response, media amplification, and cultural anxiety can intersect to create a unique form of mass hysteria.
Two women caught on CCTV, putting lives at risk by walking down the central reservation of a motorway. It sparks a police response, but this is only the start.
People who live in the UK know exactly what comes next, and it's as horrifying as it is baffling. On May 17th, 2008, police in Staffordshire, England, responded to reports of pedestrians behaving erratically along the M6 motorway. The individuals were twin sisters, Sabina and Ursula Eriksson, Swedish nationals on holiday in the United Kingdom. The officers were not prepared for what came next, and neither was the internet.
As officers approach, the women run into the fast lane. One is hit by oncoming traffic. Remarkably, neither is seriously injured. The women are twin sisters from Sweden, but what happens next baffles officers. We've frozen the pictures here because of their shocking nature.
Mike Alpha, we need ambulance, senior officers to the scene, we've got two possible fatals.
Without any warning, one of the women breaks away from the officer into the traffic and is hit by a lorry. Then her sister also runs out.
So, how did they come to end up on the side of the road? That is perhaps the only question in this case that is easy to answer. The sisters had traveled together by ferry from Ireland to Liverpool, where they boarded a coach to London. But along the way, They reportedly began behaving suspiciously and erratically, clutching their bags, acting paranoid, and talking about how people were attempting to steal their organs. The bus driver became so concerned that he removed them from the coach. Nobody knows exactly what happened next except the girls themselves, but when the officers approached to try and lead them to safety, both women abruptly ran into oncoming traffic.
On arrival, both females have ran out into the carriageway. It's got 2 serious casualties. We're going to need air ambulance.
One is in a critical condition, the other's unconscious after hitting this windscreen, surviving an accident which would kill most people. But as she comes round, the situation escalates.
No! No!
Overwhelmed by her strength, the policewoman calls for backup to prevent another major incident on the opposite carriageway. The Swedish woman is in fighting mode, and it takes 6 people to restrain her.
Both women survived, but things didn't stop there. When Sabina, who was less injured than her twin, was released from the hospital, she encountered a man who offered to provide her with a place to sleep while her sister recovered. Later that evening, she fatally stabbed him. She was arrested and subsequently convicted of manslaughter. Sabina pleaded guilty to manslaughter with diminished responsibility on September 2, 2009, having stabbed her victim 5 times with a kitchen knife. At no point during her interrogation or the trial did she explain her actions. So, what happened here? Psychiatric evaluations describe the sister's behavior as a case of shared psychosis, or folie à deux, in which delusional beliefs are transmitted between closely connected individuals. As with all the other cases mentioned here, the visual documentation of the event circulated widely online. Though the evidence seems to support the existence of this rare psychiatric phenomenon, many still wonder if there weren't something more supernatural at work. These events differ in their origins and outcomes. However, one uniting factor is that psychologists repeatedly blamed virtually unheard-of mental phenomena. This has left many people quite dissatisfied. Can such explanations be trusted? Is the human mind truly capable of creating links with strangers or siblings? Can children be tricked into misremembering traumatic events? The truth is that shared psychosis, mass hysteria, and psychogenic illnesses are real. Though they may not be understood by the lay person, they have been with humans since we first began forming social bonds. Still, for some, no explanation will ever be enough to convince them that what they saw in this footage wasn't the supernatural at work. In a way, that doubt represents its own form of mass hysteria, where the scientific world is always denying what, to some of us, seems clear as day.